Entering the 2023 season, the Nebraska Cornhuskers held the longest streak in college football among then Power 5 teams of seasons in a row without a postseason appearance, without a bowl game appearance. But did you know that if not for Texas A&M opting out of their bowl game appearance, I believe the Gator Bowl, at the conclusion of the 2021 season, due to several players being sick with COVID-19 and also a plethora of injuries, that Rutgers would have led the nation in such streak among then Power 5 teams. Rutgers had a 5-8, a rather weird record, a 5-8 record at the end of the 2021 season. They went 5-7 in the regular season, 2-7 in Big Ten Conference play. They played Wake Forest in the Gator Bowl and lost, competing with the Demon Deacons for about a half, and then Sam Hartman and the Demon Deacons very quickly pulled away in the second half and made that a blowout. Rutgers is a team that is opposite of Nebraska in terms of blue blood status, but has been similar to, if not worse, I'd actually say far worse compared to the Cornhuskers in terms of having successful seasons in the Big Ten. And that's taking into account every season since Nebraska and Rutgers respectively joined the Big Ten Conference. Rutgers' best season in the Big Ten was 8-5 in their first year under Kyle Flood, when they went 8-5 in their first year in the Big Ten Conference, that is. Kyle Flood also coached Rutgers when they were a part of the Big East. And Nebraska, meanwhile, had a 10-win season in 2012 and 9-win seasons in 2011, 13, and 14, I do believe, too. Ultimately, also 2016. After 2016, of course, Nebraska has been just a program that is constantly disappointed every season, let's say that. But I think Matt Rule is bringing the Cornhuskers back, and I think that Greg Schiano is bringing Rutgers back to the level that he had them at during his first tenure with the Scarlet Knights in Piscataway, where in the late 2000s, Rutgers had an 11-win season, upset several ranked opponents, was a contender in the Big East, and was a steady, respected program. Except now Greg Schiano is doing this in the Big Ten, which makes it all that more impressive. The reason I'm comparing Nebraska and Rutgers is they have had really similar levels of success in the Big Ten Conference since 2016, 2015, about there. And ever since 2017, up until last season, they have had losing regular season records every year. But 2023 changed something. Something changed. Rutgers went 6-6, 500 in the regular season. And they competed with Ohio State when they were at the 6-2 mark. They were already bowl eligible in October. And entering that game with Ohio State, in which Rutgers played at a high level and competed with the Buckeyes, a team that has much better coaches, more resources, exponentially more talent, I thought to myself that, yeah, this team is a good football team, fundamentally sound, strong on defense, strong in the trenches. They actually have an offense, finally, with Kirk Shiraka coaching the unit, particularly a strong ground attack. Of course, they went winless in the month of November after I thought those things, and then beat Miami in the Pinstripe Bowl, finishing with a 7-6 record, the first winning season since Rutgers' first season in the Big Ten back in 2014. But last year's team had a lot of good attributes about them, even with a blowout loss to Iowa, a heartbreaker against Ohio State, in which, look, if the pick six doesn't happen by Jordan Hancock, maybe Rutgers pulls off the upset. Penn State doing what they do to every team except Ohio State and Michigan, and particularly last year, just playing pretty mediocre, getting through the motions in the first half and then bludgeoning you in the second half with their awesome defense and competent ground game and tight end play. And then Maryland against Rutgers, I have no clue what happened there. It was the most points in the regular season that Rutgers defense gave up all year. I don't know what happened, whether they quit or Maryland just unleashed their anger after Michigan beat them in a close affair. But Rutgers had a winning season. Their team had a competent defense. They had good special teams, and their offense finally found a spark. And now entering this season, with divisions abolished, Rutgers, Indiana, Maryland, maybe Michigan State, like those 3 or 4 teams that were in the Big Ten East and by the end of divisions clearly behind Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State, looked to be some of the few teams that were going to benefit from the change of schedule. Rutgers, and I would say Maryland, and Indiana. Michigan State still has a tough schedule, but those schools are in truth the ones that I think this season really benefit from the schedule change. Rutgers, and we will further diagnose their schedule in a few minutes, they avoid Ohio State, they avoid Oregon, they avoid Michigan and Penn State. So that right there off the bat, they avoid 3 former Big Ten East teams, the best Big Ten East teams. They avoid the best team that is joining the Big Ten from the former Pac-12 in Oregon. And they also avoid Iowa. Iowa's a team that's built very similarly to Rutgers. Strong defense, good special teams. If they're going to be good anywhere offensively, it's the offensive line in the ground game. And then for Iowa, of course, you can obviously add tight end. And Iowa has beaten Rutgers for the previous 2 seasons in a row in 2022 and 2023. I don't think they played in 2021. And I think Iowa's going to be a very good team this year, as I've already documented. They avoid, in my opinion, the top 5 Big Ten programs. The toughest team that they play in the Big Ten will be either Wisconsin, Nebraska, USC, could even be Minnesota or Michigan State, depending on how the rest of the Big Ten does. And their toughest non-conference game is at Virginia Tech. Rutgers beat and dominated Virginia Tech at home last season. Taking all of this into account, the fact that Rutgers has began to recruit well, Rutgers is in the top 20 of returning production. They have had some injuries in fall camp to Mohamed Toure, for example, who, hint, I had listed as an All-American. I was going to whisper that, but there's no point. All-American at linebacker. And his injury is absolutely huge, and be praying for Mohamed Toure that he heals and has a huge season in 2025, if he's eligible. And I hope he is, but I don't have that off the top of my head. What I do have off the top of my head is the fact that Rutgers' win total is 6.5. They're expected to go bowling once again. Rutgers also brings back double-digit amounts of starters from last year. And as I said, they're top 20 in returning production. They bring back their offensive coordinator, their defensive coordinator, their head coach in Greg Schiano. And they sparingly used the transfer portal to bring in Ethan Kaliakmanis, who's the projected starting quarterback, to bring in a few players at other positions like wide receiver, for example. Got a very good, impressive FCS player. I think factoring all of that into account with the easy schedule gives me the read that the expectation for Rutgers this year should be at minimum improvement off of last season. I was actually tempted to put the expectation that Rutgers should win 8 or 9 games, and anything short of that would be a failure. But Rutgers had several close wins last year. They had more close wins than they did close losses. And I think that, look, if Rutgers goes 7-5, 8-4, and they look like a better team than last year, that's still improvement because it's hard to win at Rutgers. Rutgers, out of all the teams we've talked about so far, and out of most teams in the Big Ten, even though I think Rutgers is in the top half, top third potentially of the Big Ten, depending on whether you want to look at my record predictions for them or power rankings, I think for sure they're in the top half of the Big Ten in power rankings. Their expectations are definitely in the bottom third, I would say, of the conference, because Rutgers is not a blue blood program. Rutgers is not bringing in top 25 recruiting classes year over year over year, though maybe they will soon. They're recruiting well right now with 29 commits several 4-stars, and I think their recruiting class is top 25, maybe top 20. It's in that range mostly due to its size, but they're bringing in quality players too. And maybe the expectations will further rise up and continue to climb up that initial hill of the roller coaster if they can have a big year this season. But I think 7-5, 8-4 is a realistic record expectation. As for desired college football playoff wins, if Rutgers can make the college football playoff, which I think with this schedule they can, Schiano could be awarded a lifetime contract. I mean, Rutgers has no expectations in my mind of reaching the playoff, let alone winning a playoff game. There are many programs in the Big Ten who would have higher expectations as it relates to the playoff than Rutgers this year, and definitely in years down the line. I think this is going to be a good team, though. And the reason I say they can compete for a college football playoff spot, this sounds insane because it's Rutgers, is the fact that, take a look at their schedule. It's up on the screen for you right now. And the fact that they return 72% of their production and 14 starters. Week 1's game is against Howard. Week 2's game is at home against Akron. They have a bye week 3 before taking the road to Virginia Tech. I think that's a very well-timed bye because at Virginia Tech in week 4, hosting Washington in week 5, playing at Nebraska week 6, hosting Wisconsin week 7, hosting UCLA week 8, and playing at USC week 9 is going to be a tough 6-game stretch for a team like Rutgers. If Rutgers is going to fall apart this year and just play to their floor and collapse, it will be because of that 6-game stretch. Because the best teams that they will be playing all year will likely be in that stretch. In fact, all of them might be in that stretch. If you take who will be the 3 or 4 best teams that Rutgers plays the entire season, Virginia Tech will be up there, Nebraska, Wisconsin, USC, maybe Minnesota and Michigan State, but those are big maybes, huge maybes. And especially with road games at Virginia Tech, at Nebraska, and at USC, those are going to be interesting games for sure. It's going to be an interesting late September and October for the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Rutgers then gets a bye in week 10. They host Minnesota week 11, play at Maryland week 12, host Illinois week 13, and travel on the road at Michigan State in week 14 to close out the season. I don't have Rutgers facing a single top 10 team for the whole season, and top 10 in terms of power rankings. It's the same with ESPN's FPI. It's the same with Josh Pate's JP poll. It will probably be the same thing. I'm very confident with my potential power index. And the same thing with S&P Plus. This is a very easy schedule. It's the easiest in the Big Ten per ESPN's FPI, and I agree. ESPN's FPI actually has this as a strength of schedule that's well outside the top 50. It's closer to like an ACC schedule or even a Group of 5 schedule than it is to the average Big Ten schedule. Rutgers won the scheduling lottery. They could be the 8th or 9th, 7th, 10th best team in the Big Ten, and if they win a bunch of close games, they can still come out with 9, 10, even 11 wins. I mean, that is how easy this schedule is and how workable it is. And you add on top of it that Rutgers, especially on offense, is strong in the trenches, which is where you have to be strong if you want to win in the Big Ten. And they have good linebacker play. Even with the injury to Mohamed Toure, their leading tackler, Tyreen Powell, is back, and I think he'll step up, and he's one of the best linebackers in the country. At defensive back, you have Flip Dixon, you have Robert Longerbeam, and several other players on defense like Aaron Lewis, who I think with that much experience back, the defensive coordinator returning in an easy schedule, they're going to eat. Rutgers may be puffed up statistically because of their experience advantage, their depth advantage, and their rest and recuperation advantage, their stamina advantage. A schedule this easy for a team like Rutgers, who managed to reach a bowl game with a tough Big Ten schedule last year, if Rutgers plays to the level that I think they can play at, this schedule will benefit them in a variety of ways. I cannot speak enough about the schedule. Eventually I'll shut up about it. But it's a really big factor because if they had Michigan State's schedule where they play Ohio State at Oregon, bye, and then host Iowa, play at Michigan, I'd pick them to lose those 4 games in a row, like I'm doing, hint, with Michigan State. I'm picking them to lose those 4 games in a row because those will be very good teams, and Michigan State, they have some talent, they have some experience coming back, and some returning production back. Not as much as Rutgers. I think Rutgers would actually have a better chance to pull off an upset against a 4-game slate like that than Michigan State would, but I'd still pick them to go 0-4, maybe 1-3 at best in that stretch, because those teams are so good and they're all placed together where it would wear down most college football teams, especially when you're starting off with Ohio State and Oregon back-to-back, who are picked by basically everyone to be the 2 best teams in the Big Ten, and understandably so. Or if Rutgers had Florida's schedule, I'd pick them to lose to Miami at home, maybe beat them because it's Mario Cristobal and Miami's a team that has a lot of transfers, so it could take some time to gel. And yes, I do think Rutgers would be better than Florida, but a home game against Texas A&M would be tough. And when you have to play Georgia, LSU, Ole Miss, Florida State, when you have to play Texas and also Tennessee, I mean, Rutgers with Florida's schedule could very well be as good as I think they will be, and they could finish with like a 6-6 or 5-7 record. It's crazy. And I do think Rutgers will be a good, great team at best. I have them power rated inside of my top 25, right at 21st. And that's because of their experience, their returning production, what Kyle Monungai brings them at running back, what Gus Zelinskis, what Holden Pierce, and what their offensive line brings them, and Brian Felter. And you look at the pieces that Rutgers has on their football team. They have some questions on the interior of the defensive line. Questions as in, will they step up there? Will their run defense improve? It's still, I think, an above average to good unit there. Defensive end with Wesley Bailey and Aaron Lewis. The question there is, can they get more pressure? Lewis somewhat had a disappointing season last year. He was a good player, great player, but need to see more from him. The linebackers, even with Muhammad Toure being down, Moses Walker, Abram Wright, especially Tyreen Powell, and also Jameer Wright Collins, Daryl Dejaboom, I think that is going to still be a strength of this team. And with the secondary, Eric Rogers, Desmond Igbinosun, Flip Dixon, Robert Longerbeam, it's a deep defensive back room. The big question for Rutgers is their passing game. Their wide receivers are very underrated, I think. I think that Christian Dremel was not done any favors by Gavin Wimsatt's passing ability last year. And then Dymere Miller, he is transferring in. He's the really great FCS wide receiver that I talked about earlier. Nassim Brantley, Dylan Braywat, Ian Strong, and Chris Long. They have an underrated wide receiver room, but I have questions about their tight end group because their former tight end, Johnny Langan, is no longer with the program, and he was a reliable tight end. So who steps up there? And at quarterback, I thought that Gavin Wimsatt was going to beat out Ethan Kaliakmanis. He didn't. That was one of the first things of the 2024 season. And yes, I count the season as the preseason, regular season, and postseason because college football is a year-round sport. That was one of the first things, if not the first thing, that I got wrong this season was the Rutgers quarterback battle out of all things. Gavin Wimsatt's now at Kentucky, and he may play some type of wrinkle in their offense with his ground game. I think that he is a much better runner than Kaliakmanis was, but the staff saw something in Kaliakmanis that they didn't in Wimsatt, and I think that's the arm potential. I thought that while watching film last year and watching some of Rutgers' spring game, I thought that Wimsatt looked about as accurate as Kaliakmanis and maybe overall just had better attributes. But Kaliakmanis was praised at Minnesota. I just don't think he was utilized properly there. Last season with the Gophers, he did not have much of a supporting cast outside of wide receivers, and Darius Taylor didn't emerge until middle of the season, early season, like after the first game or so, and he got banged up, and the defense was just bad. He didn't really have any favors in Minneapolis. And Minnesota wanted a better quarterback because they're actually used to better quarterback play than Rutgers is. They have had Tanner Morgan, who in 2019 was awesome. In 2021 was okay. In 2022, when he was healthy, he was above average or good. In 2018, he was okay. And that's why they went out and got their own transfer quarterback. Rutgers was willing to get Minnesota's leftovers at quarterback, Ethan Kaliakmanis, because he has, I think, a higher ceiling in terms of accuracy. And he's worked with Kirk Shiraka. That's another advantage as well, is that Gavin Wimsatt worked with Sean Gleason and really didn't have any favors also. His supporting cast was far worse than Kaliakmanis's. And to a certain degree, I think that with the poor development and supporting cast he received, that there maybe wasn't as much to work with as there is with Ethan Kaliakmanis. But he's a huge question. I mean, he was not a good quarterback last year. He needs to play like he did in 2022, late in the season with Minnesota, if Rutgers wants to get the most out of him and have not just an average, above average offense, but a good offense. I think Rutgers will beat Howard, Akron, at Virginia Tech, Washington, Nebraska, Wisconsin, UCLA, USC, Minnesota, Maryland, Illinois, Michigan State. Correction. I noticed this as I was saying it. I think they'll lose at Nebraska and at home to Wisconsin, but I think they'll beat Howard, Akron, Virginia Tech, Washington, UCLA, USC, Minnesota, Maryland, Illinois, and Michigan State to finish the year with a 10-2, 7-2 record in Big Ten Conference play. Their ceiling is 6-6, or their floor rather is 6-6, and just doing what they did last season, which with this schedule would be a disappointment. Their ceiling, I think, is 11-1, whether that is beating all teams except for Virginia Tech, Nebraska, or USC on the road, or at home against Wisconsin. I think those are their four most likely losses. USC with the time change, and the Trojans, the kickoff for that game is scheduled, I think, at like 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. Eastern time. That'll be an adjustment for Rutgers. Wisconsin and Nebraska love to run the football, have good overall trench play, about the same or slightly better than Rutgers, but they have better quarterbacks, better passing attacks, and better depth overall. And Virginia Tech is similar, actually, to Nebraska and Wisconsin in that regard. So those will be tough games, those four in particular. I think that Rutgers will lose to Texas A&M in the Cheez-It Citrus Bowl to finish with a 10-3 overall record, and a very successful season for Greg Schiano. Rutgers, I actually had some of their players as All-Americans this season. That's how highly I think of this roster and of this team. I didn't exactly think it was appropriate right when I heard the news of Mohamed Toure being injured for me in this video to take him off my recognition list, since I've already released my All Big Ten team and have talked about other teams' players who I have on my All Big Ten team. So I included Mohamed Toure up here. Just want to shout that out because some will say, well, he's injured, so why do you have him listed up here? And it's because, well, injuries in fall camp are very unpredictable, and I edited all of this in terms of the All Big Ten players and released it in my in-depth Big Ten predictions video. So I'm not going to change it here. He's unfortunately injured, but I had him as a first teamer on the All Big Ten team and an All-American. Kyle Monungai I have also as a first teamer and an All-American running back. I have Flip Dixon and Jai Patel also as All-Americans. Other Rutgers Scarlet Knights football players who I have just on my All Big Ten team but not All-Americans are Brian Felter, Holden Pierce, Aaron Lewis, Robert Longerbeam, Gus Zelinskis, and also Tyreem Powell. A total of 10 Rutgers players made my All Big Ten teams. And I think that is appropriate. I mean, they are not Oregon or Michigan or Ohio State or Penn State. I also don't even think they're Iowa, but they're a good football team. They're disciplined. They don't get penalized. They're great on special teams and fundamentals, and they tackle well, and they're tough, and it's hard to pass on this team. And they're gritty. They will ground and pound and pull tricks on you, pull wrinkles, and they'll just run right into your face. They're very courageous. And I look at the schedule they have and how they bring back 72% of production from a team that broke through, that achieved something that no Rutgers team since 2014 achieved. A bowl victory and a winning season overall. 500 regular season, but even then Rutgers hasn't had a season where they didn't have a losing record since 2014. The 2023 team broke barriers, and I think the 2024 team is going to break another barrier, and that's finishing the season ranked and being inside the top 25 for much of the season. And in my mind, in terms of power rankings, whether it is FPI or SP+, the JP poll, or whether it's my own potential power, but my potential power index, I try and make things a little bit differently, whether it will be for the better or for the worse compared to the other power rankings in terms of accuracy. Who knows? It's relatively new. Those power rankings are more experienced. They've been around for longer, and they care a lot about team talent and quarterback play. So Rutgers may not break the top 25 in those, but they'll get close, and I think that it's very possible you'll see them not just in the coaches poll and AP poll top 25, but at some point in the year you could see them in a power rankings top 25 and seeing Vegas actually favoring this team against competent opponents and not just scrubs. The trench play is strong, and Kyle Monangai will take advantage of his experienced offensive line. This is another reason why I think I'm right on the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. And of course, with their physicality, with a good defense, with a kicker like Jai Patel, who will be able to help them win close games if needed, and just a gritty, gutsy team, a team that will run the ball very well, that will help give Kaliakmanis protection to maximize his passing potential. Combining that with an easy schedule, I think will produce some domination on part of the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Why I'm wrong is their big questions at quarterback and tight end, combined with a defense that was weaker up front last year compared to what it should have been in hindsight, and compared to most Big Ten defenses. Many Big Ten defenses, like obviously Michigan, Ohio State, Oregon, Iowa, Penn State, are very strong up front. But Michigan State is as well. Nebraska is. USC, while I don't think they're going to be strong up front this year defensively, they have enough talent to where it's certainly possible if all things go right. And you look at, Illinois last year, probably not this year, but last year, they were strong up front defensively. Minnesota, I think, should be strong up front defensively this season. UCLA has some good defensive tackles. And we could go on and on and on. But the Big Ten, don't even forget about Maryland. Maryland has some underrated defensive linemen. Being strong up front is so critical, especially with the now unfortunate injury to Mohamed Toure. That defensive line playing to its ceiling is important. If they don't, and the questions are answered in a negative way at quarterback and tight end, this could be a year where Rutgers actually ends up disappointing and not wildly exceeding their win total like I think they will. The X factor for this team is their linebacker play. Rutgers last season only allowed 21.2 offensive points per game from their opponents, which was 31st. They allowed 0.343 points per play, which was 41st. They only allowed opponents to average 5 yards per play, which was 27th. And they were top 25, 25th in yards allowed per game, allowing 330.8. And they were 36th in opponent offensive touchdowns per game, allowing 2.7 on average. Much of this improvement was because of their linebacker room, because of Mohamed Toure, and because of Tyreen Powell. Tyreen Powell is going to really have to step up with Deion Jennings gone from the program. Yeah, Tyreen Powell didn't lead the team in tackles, like I said earlier. I was confusing him with Deion Jennings. With Deion Jennings leaving and with Mohamed Toure being tragically injured and tearing his ACL, Powell will have to step up. He had 52 total tackles last year, 2 sacks, 2 passes defended, and a forced fumble. Toure had 4.5 sacks, 2 passes defended, a pick, and a forced fumble, and 92 total tackles. And Jennings had 94 total tackles and 4 passes defended. This defense was on the field all the time last year because while the offense improved compared to prior seasons, it was still pretty bad. So that's another thing to pay attention to this season is if Rutgers has a average or above average offense, like I think they will, in terms of scoring points and in terms of doing what they can with their schedule, which they can't control, this defense should exponentially improve as they'll no longer be on the field as much and will be more fluid, and they'll have the affordability to be more loose and to be more creative and aggressive rather than having to be conservative to try and not, well, accidentally give up a big play or make a mistake because they're doing something new and then the offense can't go down the field. Whenever you have, this is the story of Iowa's defense, a bad offense and a great defense, the best thing to do with the great defense is to make them conservative, because that takes the range of outcomes, like from 2022 Ohio State or 2021 Oklahoma State level aggression, where the range of outcomes is like this wide, and you could look like a bad defense or the nation's best defense, and it shrinks them. It brings them in. It's why Iowa's defense is not always even close to being elite at getting to the quarterback, but they don't give up big plays. I mean, they led the nation in yards allowed per play last season. And it's not just on the offense, but it's a large part on the offense to help make sure the defense stays off the field. But the defense needs to do what they can do to improve. Tyreen Powell is a player who can make or break the season. Same with Aaron Lewis at defensive end. 49 total tackles, 3 sacks, and 2 passes defended last year. If he can double his sack total or more than that, that would be massive, because the Scarlet Knights only had 21 sacks last year. That's not good enough. It isn't. They had 10 forced fumbles, which is good, and 9 interceptions, which is okay. That sack total should be north of 30. That will help Rutgers to not just rely on running the football and playing sound defense and not giving up big plays to win. That will allow them to get some pressure and force more turnovers and make opposing offenses go out of their way and be off schedule and make them play harder to try and beat Rutgers. On offense, it's got to be Ethan Kaliakmanis. I think more importantly, though, perhaps, is the backup running backs. What about Samuel Brown V? What does he do as the backup running back? Or Ja'Shawn Benjamin? Kyle Monangai is a player who's a power back, could even be a feature back based off of how well he did last year at 1,262 rushing yards, 8 rushing touchdowns for 5.2 yards per carry. But he cannot be the only back all the time. You need diversity in that running back room in depth in case, and I hope this doesn't happen, I pray it doesn't happen, but if Monangai goes down, you want Samuel Brown V, you want Ja'Shawn Benjamin, who averaged around 3.5 yards per carry each last year, to step up and fill in, especially with the offensive line that Rutgers has, which is one of the better lines in the Big Ten. That is my Rutgers preview, and thank you all so much for watching this video. Please remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts on this video down below. Thanks to Crash2488 and Braska Rascal for being Heisman members and sponsoring this video and channel. Thanks to Chris Lane, Connor OH, and Ismar for being All-American members and sponsoring this video and channel. Thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, and Janisha Cockrell for being all conference members and sponsoring this video and channel. Make sure, if you want to support the channel in another way, not necessarily by a Patreon membership or a super chat, if you want merchandise, like what I was wearing today, check out my merchandise store via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. You can even get a Rutgers-themed College Football with Sam t-shirt or any of the Big Ten school themes with my logo. That's what the t-shirt looks like. You can get those on my merchandise store. Thank you guys so much, and I will see you all soon. Bye-bye.